Late Night Grin. Also, what does that name mean?
We're here, folks. We are locked in. We are ready to go. We are fired up for a not-so-late Grin. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. And one of my goals around a year or so ago for the flagship program was to be fluid with these things. You know, not to be married to a time slot, to do the best show we can do on any given week. And I think we certainly are doing that this week. This is actually a very special occasion. It feels like LNG is playing the role of Forbidden Door of sorts. I feel like I'm marrying two of my differing worlds. And it's something we've talked about doing privately for a minute now. We're here to discuss junior heavyweight wrestling and all that entails. This is going to be all over the shop, round table, scatterbrain stuff, and that's the game plan. Very excited for it. We hope you're all well. And my co-host, Loss, how are you, brother?
Doing well, Joe. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. We have, for a while, kind of pondered doing a free-man booth on this on a topic, right? This one fell into our lap, and so much so that Ibou and I, Charles, we're very close friends, but we also use each other like true pro wrestling people, and so he was booked for this date really against his will, and he wasn't really feeling it, and I said, I need to bring in a heavy hitter to make him know he's got to bring it, you know, so I got Charles booked, and Ibou said, all right, okay, fine, I'll get a nap before this one. Ibou, how are you, brother?
I'm pretty good. Like Joe said, look, man, I work a lot of dates, and it's tough on the road. But like Charles, you should have saw it, man. He was like, "Come on, man, it's junior wrestling. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be fun." I'm like, "Yeah, I got you, man. I got you." It's one of those like I'll psych myself up on the day and I'll do what I got to do, right? And then he was like, "All right, I'm bringing in Charles," and I was like, "All right, I gotta actually like podcast today," which is awesome. I'm psyched up. I'm ready to go. I took a nap. Could have used another hour, but beggars can't be choosers. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk some junior wrestling. I feel like this is one of those games, Joe, where like I'm going to work myself into it. But I'm feeling an explosive second half. I can't lie to you.
I love it, and this is a topic. You know, it's like, where do you start? And I could tell Ibou's taking today's show seriously, because he even messaged me for like a format this afternoon.
I did. I said, I wanted you to kind of get my head mentally in the place of this podcast, because again, I take the topic seriously. I love junior wrestling, you know. Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you do your hosting job. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I just I think in all of our years doing this, you've never ever done that. So it popped me. It shows you the power of Charles, really. You know, it brings out the professionalism in you at last. So, nonetheless, again, we're going to kind of be all over the place. I do want to give Ibou a chance as the lead New Japan correspondent and sycophant, just to address. Do you have any comments on the situation that took place this morning with the Best of Super Juniors final? I just want to give you the floor on that, and then we'll get into our topic. And
I thought it was really rude to wake up to a tag from Chris O'Bred in all caps where he was yelling at me about this result. My next pivot was to I was like, I mean, Yo's on a good run, right? I was asking around some people like, hey man, match was good though, right? Fair hand, you know. I'm like, hey, you know, like he did all right. But looking for an out there, like, hey man, I mean, you know, he could do something with the belt. But look, not much of a comment. Shout out to Kosei Fujita. In numerous wrestling promotions, there appears to be a hesitancy to pull the trigger on promising young wrestlers. So it is what it is, but on we move. And I'm excited for Dominion season, where I could watch Yuya Uemura tag with Taichi against Zack Sabre Jr. and Ryohei Oiwa.
Hell yeah. Tremendous. All right, now, folks, as you file in, please do like the stream, all that good stuff. Get involved in the chat. I'm going to have some questions for the lads, and feel free in the chat to give us your own answers. Before we get started, I want to shout out Daisha. new member. Welcome aboard. I believe at the Colliders tier, so that's a big swing. We appreciate that. And our friend Faf, who said more like afternoon grin. True. I kind of covered that initially, but I appreciate it nonetheless, Faf, who we have a continued contentious relationship with in our community. Thank you, Faf. We appreciate you very much. So, I'm intrigued where this goes because I get the sense once we start, we're not going to stop. Now, the way I'm going to kind of set the stage here, I'm going to go to you first, Charles, on this. We can go from there and kind of kick things around. As a pure wrestling fan, I presume likely as a kid for this question, thinking about timeline-wise, that would make sense in my head, but you tell me, what would be the first wrestling you saw that in your mind you'd pair with junior heavyweight as a term? Because it has to be said that we're not only talking tonight about when there's like a designated division, right? Because nowadays, obviously, that would be even more difficult. Where would your mind go thinking back on your fandom in terms of, oh, that's different, this is a different thing? Where would you go on that, Charles?
So for me, it would have been light heavyweight. Because
Yes.
that was the term being used at the time, and it would have been Liger coming into WCW at the end of '91. There were junior heavyweights actually called that for years before that were in and out here and there, depending on who the booker was. You know, maybe they would be focused on, maybe they wouldn't be, but they were just smaller wrestlers doing what everyone else did. So like a Denny Brown, you know, it was kind of like, this is where we put people who are smaller and who aren't really stars. I don't think it was always that historically, but at the time that I was watching, that's kind of what it had become. But no, Liger was hyped really well with a series of videos that showed highlights of his matches. I rented the WCW New Japan Super Show VHS tape that was the Starrcade in Tokyo event that had Liger versus Akira Nogami on it. So yeah, that would have been my first exposure. They actually showed a Liger versus Benoit match on TBS in November of '91 from New Japan Pro Wrestling.
That stuff's fascinating in that I'd love to know. I mean, you're there as a young fan. I wonder what that experience was like for the older fan that had been watching wrestling on TBS for years, that's suddenly seeing this, right? Like, there has to have been a culture shock of sorts, right? I presume.
To an extent, yeah. I mean, because you had guys who were high flyers, but
Right.
not who were that good. And then you see Liger and you realize he's not just a high flyer, he's a complete wrestler who can, I mean, it's not that he's just, you know, sizzle. He's got substance too. So then you see and realize, wow, he's a complete wrestler. He can still do all these things, and it's amazing.
It is very much. Do you recall if that was a deal where it was you know, they had like the announcers over the top, the American announcers doing
yes, Jim Ross
commentary?
did solo commentary over the Liger Benoit match. And then I just remember that there was an episode of WCW Main Event and they were showing more Japanese matches, and Bischoff kept calling Liger Luger and having to correct himself. Well, that's certainly not Lex Luger, and then he would go back to calling the match. So
Ross, isn't that such a trademark of early like international WCW with no one's name was correctly.
Yeah, and Tony Schiavone kept falling into this thing. It's like, stop saying this, please. Like, especially now when I hear it, because he kept saying, it's really great that we have a light heavyweight division because there are people like Brad Armstrong who can't beat our top stars. Like, he would say things like that. It's like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. I always was fascinated by, you know, Jim Ross, obviously. You could tell he was he was an observer reader because obviously he had to hear about his latest news that he'd given. And also because he studied the business, he observed the business, all that good stuff. But you could tell when he would announce wrestling from Japan that they were all names he had only read.
Yes.
Because of the way he would say the names, right? Like he would say, rather than say Sasuke, for example, he'd say Sasuke. Or, you know, like just an example. So yeah, that stuff.
Folks, across the ring right now is Kensuke Sasaki and Tatsumi Fujinami to take on the Steiners. Like, all right.
Exactly. Yeah, you could tell he was aware, but it's crazy. I mean, it's 35 years ago. It makes sense there would be names he'd only read, right, for the most part. So
I'm even sympathetic to it. I don't know if you remember Starrcade '90. They made a typo and did Rey Mysterio Sr. as Rey Mysteric. like they did a C instead of an O at the end, and you could almost hear Jim Ross the wheels were turning in his head, like, oh, I have the name wrong. This is what it says on the screen. So he called him Rey Mysteric, during the match.
That's classic WCW.
So yes, to your point, Ibou, that's exactly what happened. I mean, that's kind of a trademark of WCW in those years.
Oh,
So
man.
some Liger being brought in immediately, which I think is a fitting place to start. Ibou, before I go to you on your personal anecdote, how much have you seen of that kind of the famed Liger Pillman Super? Because I think young people now, I realized this recently, it scared me. People now think of Liger Pillman as Nitro, which really is an incredible metaphor for the way people see Brian's career in general, and that it's the stuff that people focus on most. While I get it, it isn't actually the stuff that I think of with Flying Brian being this honestly sensational pro wrestler. Ibou, is that a match that stands out for you, the Super Brawl match, mate?
I mean, obviously, it feels canon to the story of junior heavyweight wrestling in general.
Yeah.
You feel like if WWE did a shitty A&E documentary about the history of junior wrestling, which God forbid that they do, you'd have like Peter Rosenberg. They're going like that night in Super Bowl when Liger was in the ring with. It doesn't matter what outlet, what content creator. If you were to tell the story, that would be a seminal moment in the history of not just the style, but its proliferation in the United States. It's not the first time an American audience was shown wrestling like this, but as far as I'm aware or can think of at the moment, it's like the first time on a major mainstream pay-per-view scale that they gave two guys time and went do this specific style of professional wrestling. And Liger just had a Liger match. Like, this is the same match you would have had with Brian Pillman in a New Japan show if he was maybe second from the top on wherever in Nagoya, Japan or something. I like the match. I think it's a very good match. I think it's understandable why it got the level of praise that it got at the time. I mean, it blew Dave's socks off. You know what I mean? He gave it like what 4 3/4 or something like that, something insane like that. Brian Pillman was at the top of his game at this time. Hilariously, what I think is great about Brian I don't really even necessarily think is like the innovative athletic stuff. I think he's just like a really good, fundamentally sound wrestler, which is why when he would mix it up with like the Horseman or just Ric Flair directly, that's when you got the best Pillman. But that notwithstanding, it's obviously a canon match in the story, like I said. And Jushin Liger is somebody that I'd imagine we're going to end up talking about a lot when it comes to this, because he was somebody that bridged the gap. He was a wrestler that was how do I put this? He's not the first guy to do most of the moves that he was doing. Like if we were being really, really technical and getting into the minutia of like certain things. However, when it comes to showing certain audiences like what he was doing and how he did it, and also like just wrestling like a star, like he was a guy that was a junior wrestler, and he also carried himself like an ace figure. And I think that was why he was able to transcend in New Japan. And I also think that's why he was able to make it in the States. Because one thing that was also a big, something that I think it would become reoccurring, a lot of the guys that really were able to translate in America when they came over in the 1990s were guys that in their own home areas and promotions and places of trade, they were like superstars within their own spot. You know what I mean? A lot of those guys who were like super duper stars, they could come to America and be plugged in and know how to get over. And that's a big trait for a lot of like top luchadors, and Liger had that as well.
Absolutely. We recently were watching some WCW Saturday Night, and Jesse, obviously, I mean, he's performing, but I think it speaks to the way the match was received that Jesse declared it to be the greatest wrestling match he'd ever seen at that point. So it gives you an idea of the way it was being spoken of, even on the television a few months afterwards. Ibou, where does your mind go? Thinking back to your young days as a fan, mate, where would you go to? He said, "Oh, this is different." Looking back, you would describe it as junior heavyweight.
Well, Charles probably has about 10 years on me, so for me, I'd probably say honestly, like Tajiri and Billy Kidman. And it's looking back, like the SmackDown version of Billy Kidman is kind of bland, but like I don't know what it was. I'm a kid. and I saw a shooting star press, and I was like, I've never seen that in my life. That's really cool. And even when I was a kid, before I even knew what a mid Carter was, I always kind of just gravitated to these random guys that I would see on the show for a couple minutes, and I always just like delusionally hope that maybe one of them would like win the WWF WWE championship and like maybe be able to fight Triple H or Brock Lesnar. And so I'd watch these shows, and then like Tajiri would come in, he'd do the handspring fucking thing off the ropes and back elbow, and I just thought he was awesome. I was a huge Tajiri fan. I liked Rey Mysterio. I liked Ray, but I loved Tajiri. I thought Billy Kidman was really neat. I dug Jamie Noble. So as I'm like talking my way through this, it seemed like that SmackDown 6 cruiserweight division, which was like, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. It wasn't like blow away or anything. And it was about like 5 guys just kind of having 5-6 minute matches. But I was into that because that was what I was exposed to. That was my cruiserweight division, you know, because I didn't get to watch Nitro in real time. So those guys stand out, and even through to my adulthood now, Tajiri is still like one of my favorite wrestlers to just watch. One of the most easily watchable. You can just throw on some Tajiri and watch him. Just one of those easily watchable wrestlers. Never feels like you're in for a dense experience or something that you have to kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, you know when you have to like psych yourself up to watch their guy sometimes.
Right.
All right, well, it's this guy. Let's get into it. Let's do it. Like, no, it's Tajiri. You know what I mean? It's like butter. It just passes right through your body almost. But yeah, those are some of the early names that I would say off the top of my head. Trying to see if I could. I don't know if you know what Eddie Guerrero probably would apply to this because O2 Eddie very much wrestles like a New Japan Junior Heavyweight, a classical New Japan Junior Heavyweight, and his work is so snug and it's so tight and it's sharp, it's impactful. And without even realizing it, because he's one of those guys that Joe, you always talk about Eddie. You say how like when you watch him now, you're in awe at like how good his work looks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I didn't notice that, but I just knew on some level subconsciously that I was drawn to how he wrestled, and it wasn't hard for him to convince me that wrestling was real because I watched the show and I thought it was real, and I watched Eddie and I'm like, yeah, he's like killing guys in there. So those are some of the early names that stands out.
Yeah, it's interesting. Charles, just a couple of things I wanted to throw your way based on that is like, is it funny to you in 2002, obviously that point you've been watching wrestling for longer, that early 2000s, mid 2000s, is it striking to you when you see people in our chat and as well as Ibou talking about that being their like cruiserweight junior? Because I would presume the perception was, oh, this stuff's cool, but he hasn't got nothing on the Nitro cruiserweight division, right? Like that was always the WWE perception. How does that is that something that makes sense to you, I guess, looking back now?
It makes sense. I don't know that it's what I think because I do think all the guys in that era were very good. So, and there were a lot of really good matches. I mean, SmackDown had a lot of good stuff. It wasn't as emphasized as a division. And I think the difference was by that time, you have a lot of guys who started as junior heavyweights. And I hope we can talk about this throughout the show, who later became heavyweights. And so what happened is that the distinction of the weight class became less important because the style was just the style. So that was already happening, you know, in the early 2000s, but those guys were really good. I mean, I enjoyed a lot of matches during that time. Sometimes I liked them more than the Nitro matches even, just because sometimes and we don't see very many examples of it anymore, but there are occasions when the heavy hand of WWE's production influence and the coaching and all of that is a positive. And there were times, I mean, it's easy to romanticize the Nitro cruiserweight stuff, and there's a lot of it that's really great. And there's a lot of it that was just a train wreck.
Yeah.
A little unrefined and
Yeah. And so the one thing about the WWE house style is that stuff like that in WCW, because it was so managed, you could sneak through with stuff like that. And sometimes it worked out great and sometimes it didn't. WWE is so micromanaged that nothing ever sneaks through. So maybe you don't get things that are quite as spectacular, but the hit rate is better.
So I knew we were going to end up here, so I think we may as well just leap in that direction because Ibou brought it up, and Charles, I know you were kind of leaning this way when we got to the topic. I'm really intrigued by that decade from the introduction of, because again, as you just mentioned, there was light heavyweight wrestling before the cruiserweight division in WCW. Very short lived, and obviously Watts and all that stuff. But for most people, there's a moment watching Nitro where they were like, "Oh, this is different," right? I mean, I always think of on the October '95 Nitro where Eddie and Benoit wrestle, the reaction of Heenan and Bischoff when that power bomb lands, and if you know that
Yes.
power bomb. You hear them as if they've never seen anything like that, because they may not have, really, right? In truth.
Yeah.
And I always think that decade is an interesting one to circle for this topic, because if you go 95 to 2005, the reason Ibou was hesitant when it came to does Eddie count is like, he absolutely counts, but the reason Ibou you're hesitant is by that point, as Charles mentioned, the style is becoming the style, right? It's
Right.
crazy to look at, Ibou, the time when you started watching, you're actually in the midst of like, it's kind of becoming normalized, and obviously by 2005, the guys we just mentioned have been world champions. Ray is about to be a world champion. It feels like that decade is such a time of evolution stylistically, Ibou, right? It's fascinating.
I literally lived it, and and as I'm like basically getting settled in and getting my feet with pro wrestling as a medium, it becomes like the style, and then like WWE, it felt like WWE took it away from me almost, because like a couple years in, they went, no, we're all going to be like really boring now. And it's like, wait, what happened? This is awesome. This is great. Ray's doing like springboard, like West Coast pops and things like that. This is so cool. And then it gets taken away from me. And then I feel like, me just being like this fifth grader looking around like a crackhead, like, how do I find this? Like, I run into TNA and I'm on the internet and I run into like Maru Fuji for the first time. And I'm like, oh my God, and I remember like watching like documentary footage of like the WCW Cruiserweight stuff, and I'm being like, oh my God, I gotta find this. And that's kind of what happened for me, because to your point, Joe, Eddie just worked how he worked. And you either in 02 specifically, you either kept up with him or you didn't. That SmackDown crew pushed the pace, they worked their butts off, they worked hard, they were go, and you either worked with them or you just weren't, or you didn't, and so Shelton and Charlie Haas had to just fit in. They just were thrown right into the fire and wrestled with them. And it applied to so many other guys. And so to the point again, just last night, Joe, I'm rewatching the three-way tag from Survivor Series 02. Los Guerreros, Edge and Ray, and Benoit and Angle. And this is not even considered like a top 10 SmackDown 6 match.
Mm-hmm.
It only goes 3.5 on it and stuff, and it's not like the No Mercy match from reputation wise or the rematch or whatever, but it's very good. It's very, very good. And one thing that stands out to me is before Angle and Benoit's elimination, the 6 minutes before their elimination, everybody just is flying in to do their moves, right? And like Ray does like a tornado to the outside, and he does a baseball slide Rana to Chavo, who bases amazingly, and he flies towards like the entrance ramp on the Rana. And there's like there's a freaking like there was a sunset flip pin attempt, and then like another guy on the top rope jumps to sunset flip the other guy, and it turns into like a wheelbarrow 3-person German thing that I've never seen. And like everybody's just flying all over the place, doing all kinds of diving headbutts, blah 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 blah. And like had these guys, none of these guys actually were in the cruiserweight division at the time, but this is very much that style that they were working. And beyond that, what struck me was it's actually a very modern layout in terms of like a waterfall sequence of guys popping in and to doing all their climactic things to then lead to the finish, right? Even though it was a finish of like the fall. But I was watching that, I was like, man, that's a very modern layout. Like you'd see this on like a Dynamite multi-man or like an AEW pay-per-view multi-man, right? And that's how they're working in 02. And there was no matches like that on the WWE product in like 06, And so I just find it interesting. But like simultaneously, where you didn't get that in WWE, you'd get that from like the undercard guys in like Ring of Honor in like 02, 03, 04, because that crew of like Xavier and Low Key and Homicide, and AJ Styles, they were very much like doing the same thing. And you saw that from the Ring of Honor, the early Ring of Honor crew and the undercard stuff, and then the TNA, obviously, which that's another big part of my personal story when it comes to this junior heavyweight style is, even though it's not always about weight limits and it's no limits, the X Division exposed me to a completely new world. And I remember when I first saw AJ Styles ever, when I first watched him, what it maybe 05 or 06, he blew my mind. He just blew my mind. I was like, it's like, this is like if Billy Kidman was even better. Oh my God. Like that was like what I thought.
That was accurate, yes. So we're gonna circle back to TNA because I do think they're an interesting part of the story. Before
Chapter.
we do,
Yeah.
yes, Charles, how interesting is it? You know, even about 2002 there. If you go back just 3 to 4 years to World Championship Wrestling, there feels like there is such a line between the guys we're talking about and the style we're talking about and the guys working on top of the card, right?
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me how quickly it changed, and I am intrigued by the impact of the smart fan sentiment of fair or unfair, right or wrong. There was that sentiment among the observer reader, the smart fan of, man, if only these guys I love watching in the mid-card could do their thing in the main event, right? It happened very quickly and it crept up on pro wrestling, I think. But what do you make of that kind of sudden shift from big gap and suddenly, oh, this is just the style, I guess, now, right? It's interesting.
Oh, man. So WCW, because, like you said, you had your Hogan and Nash and Goldberg and whoever else in the main event picture, and they were not doing anything remotely resembling that style. And it became this idea that it almost perpetuated itself in the sense that, okay, well, that's because that style can't get over at the top level. Because if it was, then they would be doing it at the top level, even though they weren't booked to do it at the top level. So it created this whole, I would even say, system of justice. Like the whole idea of, I can't believe this mid-carder is being wasted. Why aren't they in the main event? Started with this period of WCW. That's not really a sentiment you would hear all the time before that. And it became associated with the junior or cruiser style or whatever you want to call it. And so it was, part of it was size and part of it was style. Part of it was the international flavor of it compared to the main event scene. So there were all these things kind of intersecting. But yeah, it shaped the view, I think, of a generation of wrestlers who were heavily influenced by that stuff, who then went to Ring of Honor, went to TNA, were on the independents, and that's what they were. I mean, there were other things which we'll talk about too, but that was a big factor. This idea of, okay, that was unjust and now WCW is gone. So even if WWE isn't going to make it right, we can make it right through this other presentation of wrestling.
Fascinating stuff. And, perception is reality. And I think with all these things, there's obviously nuance, right? There are some WCW cruiserweights that I would not rather watch than the heavyweights, but there's some cruiserweights I absolutely would. It's almost like there's a, it isn't one extreme or the other, but I definitely think there's truth to what you're saying. Absolutely. That seems to be the sentiment. Ibou, what you going to say, mate?
I almost feel like that's a tenet of early smartdom, though. You know what I mean? In the sense that, like, things that, like, we used to yell about, like, you look back and go, like, would that have actually worked? Like, maybe not. But, like, there was a militancy to it and a passion where you're like, look, that's just where we were at the time, where it's like some people would just be like, no, Cyclope should absolutely fucking get on that show. And you're like, all right. But one thing that I started beginning to think about, and I'm sure that we'll get to this too. It's funny. This is a conversation that when you really think about it, Joe, it opens up, like, it's like an onion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you could easily just go, Junior Heavyweight, oh yeah, Saban, Petey Williams, all right, and then you need to move on. But no, like, when you think about it and think about your journey with it and think about, like, how it came to be and, like, how the fans perceived it and this and that, like, there's so much to it. And I'm thinking about the fact that another thing that really pushed the evolution of the style is it almost feels like scientific what was happening, that, like, guys would come from one location to another. See, back when wrestling was regional, you know what I mean? And there's because everything now, you know what I mean? But before, like, these people wrestle this way over here and they wrestle this way over here. And it's so cool that, like, there's a whole generation of guys that went, I'm going to take what I know from here and bring it here. And they're like, holy fuck. And it's like creating fire. And it's like lucha guys going to Japan and, like, oh my God, now, like, their work has some, like, snap to it. Holy shit. Or, like, whatever. And you get, like, hybrids, but then the hybrids become what then the next guys pick up. And then these next guys pick up the hybrid are like, what if you add, like, an MMA flavor to it, because whatever. And then, like, that turns into the whole thing. And so it's a cool thing to think about. And I can't wait to, if we're going to get to talking about Lucha Resu itself and how that just absolutely blew the doors open on this.
Yeah, I want to definitely throw that your way here briefly. Shortly. Yeah, I mean, to your point, and it's why I think, quote unquote, it used to be better is a little bit of a slippery slope, is the reality is what you just described is something that inevitably had to be a thing of the past after, because that was something we watched play out on television, right? That kind of merging of worlds, and that it couldn't last forever that way because the whole point was we were all seeing it all of a sudden in the same spot. So it's like, of course, things would be homogenized. That's inevitable. You know, Nitro is such an interesting show in this particular lane because Nitro is a show where Hulk Hogan could do a promo and the next segment could be Finlay versus Eddie Guerrero for 3 minutes. And it's like, of course that led to kids going, oh, wow, there's different things happening here that I could then merge. You know, it's kind of inevitable that would be the case. I did want to, we'll go in a bunch of different directions here, but to give my own answer, Ibou kind of got ahead of me on this. The TNA X division is really interesting to think about in this topic, I think, because obviously, yes, not about weight limits and that stuff, and yes, Samoa Joe was in there, but it was really the absolute son of WCW's Cruiserweight division, right? It was like...
Without question.
I don't think they would admit it now, but there was absolutely people internally in TNA that had that mentality of the money-making style was this. These guys are great as the fireworks show on the show, right?
Yeah.
And it was totally a sequel to what happened in WCW. And I think in some ways, to Charles' earlier point about the smart fan mentality, it even exacerbated that and made it worse, right? Because they didn't have with respect, TNA at no point had the box office success that WCW had in the mid to late 90s to point to and be like, money-making style. That wasn't really the case, right? You were kind of watching the show going, why can't this AJ and Daniels match be for the world title? And I think that's something we look back now even differently. Charles, I know you're not a big... TNA wrestling was never a big part of your fandom, fair to say, right? That was never a big... How much of the X Division stuff would have made your radar, mate?
I mean, I knew what was happening. I knew the stuff that had buzz. I would catch things sometimes like on a compilation or things like that. It's just with TNA, I could never get past the name. I just couldn't get past the name. And not only the name, but the guy who came up with the name, who did a lot of the booking, who we know who we're talking about. I couldn't get past that because I'd just seen him destroy WCW, like almost burn it to the ground. So that was still pretty fresh in my mind at that point.
Yes, very fair. And to that, we'll leave him unnamed because we don't need to go into that kind of ways. But even like when he comes back in 2006, it absolutely changes the X Division. And as a result, I think really hurts their core fan base. But maybe we'll get into that. So you were a big... Go on, go for it, Charles.
We should mention, I mean, that he, just to talk about some examples of that, he made Oklahoma the Cruiserweight champion. They did the finish that destroyed the relationship between WCW and New Japan with the Liger and Juventud Guerrera, where Juventud smashed Liger with a tequila bottle to win the title, and New Japan was so upset about it that they stopped working with WCW.
Yeah.
So
a relationship that lasted in almost an entire decade.
Yes, and survived a lot of incompetence. So it took talent to get to that point. Yeah.
But other than that, you did great.
Yeah.
Ibou, you were a big TNA kid, and it is interesting that you mentioned AJ Styles. He came up in the chat a few times too. Like, he, I think, was, and it was actually like 10 years later when they get the Spike deal, so the timeline is kind of perfect in that way. I think people watching AJ was the experience people have watching like Eddie on Nitro a decade prior, right? Like, it was, whoa, who is this dude?
Yeah, and I think
go for it.
What helps TNA's branding of the X Division is that it did feel like an evolution of WCW Cruiserweights because the Cruiserweight style itself had already evolved between 95 and 2005. Now, not necessarily with like an Eddie, because Eddie was a do-it-all guy that could do the Lucha Libre and he could do the New Japan Junior style. But like the way Psychosis and Super Calo wrestled isn't quite the way that like Senshi wrestled. And because I think it's fair to say a lot of the 96, 97 WCW Cruiserweight wrestling is like generally Lucha Libre driven. right? And specifically like the AAA lucha style,
Yeah.
what I think would be fair to say was a lot of their the backbone of their cruiserweight wrestling. And I would say that TNA's X division by that point was very much like the Ring of Honor independent style kind of coming to TNA. And in the 10 years since, what happened was, you go from just lucha to lucha and like the Japanese style. And then the lucha Japanese style and a little bit of like that MMA flavor that I was talking about that like certain guys tried to implement because, people became perverts for pride. But like, again, and so like to maybe like a casual fan, and I can't really speak to this because I wasn't a guy who was able to watch both in real time necessarily, but I could imagine it almost being a great branding tool. You're like, oh man, look at small guys doing cool stuff again, and it's like, oh, I've never seen that. That's a new one. Because I'm sure for some people it's like, well, they had already seen like a tope and a pescado and a plancha, but maybe they never seen like some of the really complicated and creative moves that some of these guys are doing. So from that standpoint, it did feel like, oh my God, really, it is no limits. These are just guys like for me, I remember like thinking like they'd run these packages and sometimes you'd see like Mike Tenay talking or you get the X Factors on the screen and stuff like that. And I remember just thinking like, this is the division where you have alien human beings doing things that like you never thought were possible in wrestling. And it felt like every week I was seeing a new guy. I'm like, I'd discover Petey Williams or I'd discover like a Sanjay Dutt or whoever. And they all like had like uniquely different moves that I'd never seen. Like I remember being like, what? Like I remember when I first saw a Canadian Destroyer, I remember like literally being like, what the fuck? And like first time seeing AJ do his spiral tap and stuff like that. So yeah, I think from that standpoint that helped TNA. And yes, I was a TNA kid. And by that point, without realizing it, I had already developed like the unconscious or subconscious smart mind, because by 2007, I watched TNA and I thought TNA has better wrestling than WWE. But even with that, like notwithstanding, I would watch TNA and go, Scott Steiner is cool. I have no problem with, Christian Cage or whoever.
Yeah.
But I would like to see, insert guy.
Sanjay Dutt.
Dude, I legitimately, Joe, I have a journal entry from 2008 or 9 where I said Sheik Abdul Bashir will be the next big star in pro wrestling.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know.
You
man.
And Cornette, one and the same on that.
Sheik Abdul Bashir, but my God, but yeah, and I loved it from that standpoint, and I thought, and I would imagine a lot of people who are, who are preteens, young teens like myself, it probably did just change their fandom because it changed mine. And I remember I couldn't go back to this is like me at the time, right? I couldn't go back to Raw, right, and watch like it's gonna sound super snobby, even like. And again, the way I interact with wrestling is like completely different now. I just look at it differently, right? But like at the time, right, I couldn't even watch like Shelton and Carlito have a Raw match. I'd watch that and I'd go, this is really slow and simple and boring and basic. Like that.
It's
that's
funny because I think now you would like that match more than the match that you were popping for as a kid, right? Like because it's probably more to your taste now. Hilariously,
yeah, and there's definitely examples of that for sure. Like I think a lot of the X Division stuff I can still watch and enjoy, but like to your point, Joe, like the things that I value were different. And again, if nothing else, that crop of guy in TNA was flashy and exciting, and at all points delivering something that like was eye catching. You know what I mean? And so yeah, that. What I would credit the X Division with is that it began to shape the first time that I like had a tape. Like I'll put it to you this way. When I watched wrestling in 2002, I just watched the show. I watched the show. I thought it was all real. And I had guys I liked and guys I didn't like. You know what I mean? And by 2006, I was able to just go, no, I like this in wrestling. And I don't like this in wrestling. Which is that's a big step. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm able to go, no, I don't like Rene Dupree. I'd rather not watch him. So Whereas in '02, I'm just like, oh, he's a jerk. You know, I'm a little
He's
kid.
a heel, right? Yeah, boo,
Yeah, I want
right.
someone to beat him. Yeah.
We're gonna come back to TNA because there's some. You gave a lot of positives and there's some negatives we've got to delve into. We'll do that now. Before we do,
Without question.
Mike Tenay got a shout out, and Charles, I want to send this your way with Mike Tenay. It feels like he's a big part of this story for like shaping the fans' mindset, right? And shaping, honestly, developing the fans' eye for it. One thing that I think wrestling could learn a lot from when you go back and watch the way the cruiserweights are presented, especially with Tenay once he gets in the booth, he does a very good job of adding color and detail to the way they wrestle. And that, I think, is a bit of a lost art now. I think there's a lot of citing of accomplishments and achievements, and there's some great descriptive language, which I appreciate. Nigel was especially great at that. But the actual nuts and bolts of why a guy's a great wrestler, I think we could do a better job of. How big a story do you think Mike Tenay is in terms of what you mentioned before about fan perception? It feels like he's a big part of that to me. What do you reckon?
He was, and it's mostly positives. I think there are some things that I didn't care about as much, which I'll talk about. But yeah, I mean, he was great at explaining, contextualizing, telling you a little bit about their accomplishments. That's what this move is called. This is who originally invented it, but this is a different twist because of this. This is how this wrestler sees this particular thing. Like, he was very good at providing all of that. And I thought that was great. I love that aspect. What I didn't like, and this is what I think over the long haul, it hurt, because he was okay. It's one thing if, like, okay, it's a brand new style. It's 1996. We just signed all these guys. We need some context. So Mike Tenay is here to explain. By 98, when you're still having to do it and the announcers aren't internalizing anything you're saying, they still don't know the name of anything. They still don't know anything about all this. Then what it does is it sends a message to the audience that either this isn't worth caring about, or it's unknowable. It's too complicated. You'll always need to bring in Mike Tenay because you'll never be able to understand it without him. And I think that made it seem more exotic than it needed to be, maybe, or more distant than it needed to be, when, you know, the idea should have been, okay, you have a guy like this who's, you know, here for the transition, here to get everyone acclimated, comfortable, explain things, help the other announcers understand how to get it over. And then, yes, you can still use Mike Tenay, but all the announcers can do what he does. And I think that it made it seem like it's too difficult to understand, I think, because you can only have one guy in the world who can explain it.
I feel like
it's kind of pigeonholed it, right? But go for it.
No, I was going to say, I feel like that problem kind of persisted with some of this for like years, even past WCW, to other companies and other promotions that tried to just attempt a division like this.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. To go back to, you know, I think did a great job highlighting, Ibou, the strengths of what TNA did. However, I do think we've kind of got these two timelines going along here, and I actually think there's a result of that we need to talk about, which is, we mentioned how inevitably that kind of was the normalized style, right? It's a different wrestling world once some of those guys have been world champions. If you look at TNA's side of that, for most of TNA's existence, the fans saw AJ Styles as a main event wrestler. And as we know, X Division was not about weight limits. We have keep stressing that. So, what I think happened in the mid to late 2000s that I actually think was inevitable, but I think they did it with such little care that frustrates me. Because AJ Styles could be the TNA World Champion and could do a 450 splash or a spiral tap, whatever. As a result of that, their way of marketing the X Division then became like almost like a novelty of they could fall off high structures and they could like climb things and like. And I'm not saying there's not value to it. So I think some of the old X matches are genuinely incredible. But when we talk about the WCW Cruiserweight division, and obviously it's a different time, so I'm not saying this necessarily though because it's an artistic choice, but a lot of those matches are wrestling matches. Imagine that. That are more presented as if on a card with Mike Tyson in the main event, De La Hoya's fighting underneath, right? That's almost the vibe. In TNA, without Mike Tyson, it became, here's the wrestling match in the main event. Wasn't it fun earlier when all those guys were climbing up and down that red structure? I think when you pair that with the scramble craze that took over wrestling. I think that's fundamentally changed the way fans perceive junior heavyweight wrestling. Evie, what do you make of that kind of? I guess it was a natural evolution where it had to have a new niche, but TNA did it with so little care. I think. I don't know.
I'm just like visualizing now a bunch of dudes just falling off the X of assholes.
It's true though, right?
Yeah. Like the Ultimate X is a match that like I said before. I can go back and watch a lot of like cool like X Division matches, and like when I say that, like, in my brain, I'm looking at like Saban and Senshi or like AJ and Daniels versus whoever. But like that is the match that I got now. I kind of just like I just find it like funny now when I watch an Ultimate X match. Like when I was a kid, I loved any match with a big structure that you could climb. I loved Hell in a Cells. I loved ladder matches. I loved Ultimate X. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. It's like an X and you climb it and you converge in the middle and like a guy falls off. And now I watch, I'm like, what are they doing to these guys, man? Like it just like because what would happen is it's never super healthy, I don't think. When you start making people interchangeable in the sense that it's like, all right, now we just need guys that we can throw into these big matches on a big show where they do that. And it's hilarious. And that's still like the thing now in TNA. TNA right now, like when they do a big show, they're like, all right, we need like 8 assholes that are going to like fucking fly and fall off this X.
Yeah. It opened, there was about 4 years of TNA pay-per-views that opened with 6 to 8 man matches in which there was some kind of thing to climb or fall down off of. It was just what they did, right? It's like, right. I don't know. I don't know.
It pigeonholes it in the sense that like, no, most promotions won't do that in a main event spot for their top world title.
Yeah. And
then the question turns into like, is that fine? Like, is there nothing wrong with that then? Or like, or what are the outcomes of that then being a preliminary thing? Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Charles, is what we just described something that was inevitable when the main event style featured some of the hallmarks of the junior heavyweight wrestling? Was it inevitable that junior wrestling would have to become almost its own like kind of freak show, really, of just stunts? What do you think?
Probably just because, when you have, and it was happening in Japan years before it was happening in the US, where you had, juniors kind of graduating, bulking up and graduating to the heavyweight division. So it was happening everywhere. And then it becomes, okay, well then if the heavyweights are doing all the same spectacular stuff, then what, other than the weight class, what separates these guys or what makes them special? And then, that's that you have to scramble for things, and that's where it gets, it becomes what it becomes.
It's interesting how New Japan handled it because there's obviously, more than other promotions, they are very much beholden to certain types of traditions in terms of how they do things. But even with that said, as New Japan main events became less, Inoki is jostling for holds with Yoshiaki Fujiwara and trading leg kicks, and then it turns into just more things being done and more things that you would commonly have seen a decade prior in a junior match. Like as that started to happen, the juniors themselves just continue to innovate, but then eventually it just kind of turns into, and for other reasons, obviously, like with the MMA boom, but it just turns into like a general division of the emphasis in New Japan, I felt like. So it's just interesting how that happens. Oh, another thing.
Yes, please. Yeah.
One thing that I always noticed was in 1977, Tatsumi Fujinami was just considered in the Japanese side, this dude is just marvelous. This is just the most gifted, sharp, technically sound, talented wrestler maybe you'd ever seen. And he'd open these shows and he was so sharp and so snug and so quick with his counters and everything in between. And he'd win a match with like a bridging dragon suplex hold or something, right? And he was the junior heavyweight wrestler of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And then you get to around 1980, 81, and he's working with Dynamite Kid and Satoru Sayama. And what I always find interesting is if you watch any young lion match in New Japan now, the way they work is just base mode like Tatsumi Fujinami. always found that interesting because now, as the audience I'd imagine knows, New Japan, like they teach the young lions the basics.
Yeah.
You do the basics, you do the basic moves, the things that you fundamentally should just understand how to apply and do. And then when you graduate that, then you can do all the cool stuff. And it's just interesting that what they consider the baseline basics is what Tatsumi Fujinami just did. And I always noticed this, the Boston Crab and the Dragon Suplex and just the holds and the sharpness and like the snug work, all that type of stuff. So to Joe's point about these things being the norm, like what Fujinami did, Joe, like fucking almost 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Like that, like blew people's mind.
Man.
Yeah, crazy, right? 50 years.
Yeah.
Like it's like that's like what's like demanded of you to like as a requisite to become a good wrestler, as like your foundation. It's almost like telling a modern NBA shooting guard, like, well, yeah, man, if you want to come in the league and do A, B, and C, you gotta have Michael Jordan's perimeter footwork, and you have to have a post game of some kind to then turn around and hit a jump shot. And you got to be able to make a mid range. You got to be able to shoot from deep if you could, and this and that. And it's like, so that's just kind of that goes. And that's not even me doing like an evolution of the sport thing, because I don't like that. But like it's more like a this is now what everybody should emulate and do, and in terms of normalizing, like on the, you know what I mean, like, so like I said, like the heavyweights now do that. Yeah.
Well, to your point too, and this is a whole other topic that there's elements of we'll leave unsaid, but there is an evolution.
Sure.
I think what some of us find frustrating is when that topic is turned into just a black or white. Clearly, that makes it better. It's like, well, no, it evolves and changes, but that doesn't necessarily. With that comes pros and cons, right? Like the reason I was interested by this topic and something we've already touched on tonight, which I'm, was excited about, is some of the things that have changed when it comes to the type of wrestling we're discussing here is stuff that had to change inevitably. It's like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, and that's okay. It's interesting to contextualize and kind of shine a light on these things. With that in mind, that's actually a great way for us to transition. We talked already about
Let's go.
fan experiences, again, as just pure wrestling fans. And let's be clear, we're all still wrestling fans, but I want us to now look at some junior heavyweight experiences as a quote-unquote smart fan, ardent fan, online fan, dirt sheet fan, however you want to put it. Because obviously none of us would have seen Fujinami as a kid watching SmackDown, but when would you have seen, the classic junior wrestling that then kind of made you think about things differently? Charles, I'm fascinated. You've seen more wrestling, I think, than anyone in the world at this point, but I'm intrigued where you'd trace back, like as an online fan, where would that start for you, where you'd watch stuff you'd maybe heard about, maybe from Mike Tenay on commentary, that kind of thing. Give us some timeline on that, man. I'm intrigued.
My freshman year of college, which would have been like 98, 99, I traded for 3 tapes. The 94 Super J Cup, the 95 Super J Cup, and an RF video compilation called Aerial Assault that was a bunch of junior heavyweight matches. And then I think I also got a Michinoku Pro show, the big one with the famous 10-man tag. Mm-hmm. So there were 4 actually. So I got those 4 tapes all as one trade. So that would have been my introduction to it. Obviously I, loved it and got really into it and all that. Even more the Michinoku Pro stuff at first anyway than the New Japan footage. That took a little bit more time. It was a little bit harder to get, but yeah. So that would have been a lot of late 80s. The Aerial Assault compilation, I think, was a lot of late 80s, early 90s Japanese footage. Liger versus El Samurai, their Super Junior final that they had with the mask ripping in the blood and all that was on there. There was some Owen Hart on there. And so that was really interesting. Hiroshi Hase against Takada, like that was one of the matches. It's easy to forget, by the way, that Takada was also like a star junior heavyweight, just because that's not what he's famous for. But yeah, that would have been my introduction to all of that. The Super J Cup, I remember I was intrigued because it was supposed to be the best Benoit versus Jericho match, and if you were subscribed to that, justice for the cruiserweights stuff, which I very much did at that point in my fandom, then Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho were the two kind of poster children of that. And so this was supposed to be their best match, the one that happened in war. And so, yeah, that was my introduction.
Fascinating stuff. Ibou, I know you and I have talked about Super J Cup, and I think we're, more than anything, we're marks for that process that Charles literally just described. Like, you and I have had conversations about the idea of that, right? Like, I got to get this tape and see it. Now, that's obviously, for Charles, that's a few years later, but Ibou, that's something you've obviously watched back since. Talk to me, brother. Super J Cup.
Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
I mean, that show was it was huge. Jushin Liger wanted to get the best juniors from the entire scene, not just in New Japan, but the entire scene, to wrestle. I mean, Hayabusa was just a kid when he did this show. And I mean, you got a young Eiji Ozaki who just kind of started doing this not too long ago. And he got him on this show. And if you look at some of those names, like, it's a lot of guys that like are Hall of Famers of the industry. But like, if you contextualize it within the context of like, what would this have been, like mid '94, I want to say, a lot of them weren't like the man that they would end up becoming from a name standpoint.
That shows part of what they became, right? It's like yeah, absolutely.
It takes like some elite foresight, or like it just serendipity that it kind of turned out in the way that it did. It's a great show. One of my favorite things that I read about, and when I look into this show, Charles, is that like it happened, and Dave's initial coverage of it is based off the pictures on the magazines. This looks like it was a super incredible show.
Yes.
Literally, like, reviewing the show based off of literal pictures of like Great Sasuke in midair doing like a senton to the outside. Like, he's in the Observer, right? He is describing magazine photographs. He's going, there's a shot of like Sasuke diving into the crowd, and he's like typing about like that type of thing, right? And then, like, I want to say the week later, they run like brief highlights of the matches on the New Japan Weekly broadcast. And then Dave literally goes, based on the highlights, this was like, it's about a 4.5-star match between Benoit and Sasuke here. Literally doing that. It's so funny. And then like week 3, he finally has some footage to review. It's such a cool thing. And I think that's one of those shows where like it speaks to the old way of wrestling consumption and like things spreading like wildfire and word of mouth and that type of thing. And it's just super duper neat from that standpoint. I had heard of this show for some time. Benoit versus Sasuke was on a WWE DVD. I forgot which one it was, but it was on a WWE DVD. Because I remember I watched it on like who remembers WWE 24/7?
It was,
Oh, yeah.
That would have. Did they show physical releases on there too? It's wild.
A few, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, because I saw it on there first. That's the first match from that show I've seen. It was that one, and it's being freaking introduced by Mean Gene. I remember catching this, and this would have been like 2007 or 2008. It wouldn't have been 08. WWE would not have put this in 08. But
No, they
yeah, I see. I seen this on 24/7 like around like 06, 07. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, this is amazing. And that would have been around the exact time that because I discovered Japanese wrestling in 2005. I watched One Night Stand 2005, and I thought Mike Austin and Masato Tanaka was the coolest shit I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And that leads me to the whole rabbit hole of watching ECW. I watched Heat Wave 98 in its entirety on the internet in 2005. At the time, I thought Hayabusa and Shinzaki versus RVD and Sabu was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Again, I saw Tanaka awesome. I said, oh my God, this is even better than the One Night Stand match, which now I disagree, but still, at the time, I'm like, oh my God, this is better than the One Night Stand match. And I remember just thinking, I need to see more of this. And so I'm just looking up stuff. And I'm looking up stuff on like random sites that had all kinds of deranged pop-ups that would give my computers viruses. But one thing led to another. And then out of nowhere, Joe, I find like as HD as you can get in 2005, 2006, I find like a video file of Naomichi Marufuji versus Kenta. And here's the thing. The title of this video was in literally a language I could not read. So I didn't know what I was. It was literally a video file, HD, of a Noah match that like just happened with like unreadable text.
That was the
Right?
internet Wild West when it came to wrestling footage. Right? It's just stuff was just out there in the
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, it's not our job to explain it. You got it. Now go figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Had to go what? And I remember clicking this, and I see a green ring. I don't know what I am looking at. I don't know who these people are, right?
Yeah.
And it's just Marufuji and Kenta. I remember the opening sequence. They were moving like faster than I had ever seen human beings move in a wrestling ring. And then like Kenta's doing these kicks, and I'd never seen kicks that stiff in a match. And I remember being like, what the fuck is this? Right? Like it blew me. So a man being like fucking just a kid. So I saw that. And I remember, and then at the end, like they're killing each other with like these brain busters and shit. And I was just like it was so violent.
Yeah.
I forgot how I got to this topic, but I saw that, and now I remember how I got to this. So I saw this match, and I was like, man, I need to watch Japanese wrestling. Like that was my opinion. I was like, I need to watch Japanese wrestling, and I also need to figure out what the fuck this is because I didn't know, right? And hilariously, Joe, about a year later, because like for the next year, I would like read random I'd read forum comments that I could find. I went to this thing called this site called like canoe.ca. It was a Canadian sports website, and it was a pro wrestling section where they would. Yeah, this is how far I went to.
You've told me this before. And it pops me every time. Go on, carry on.
I would just read articles about every wrestling show that would exist because there was guys on it show, right? And I'm reading canoe.ca and I'm reading these articles about wrestling shows, and I read like Ring of Honor, right? And I'm seeing names that I just didn't recognize, but for whatever reason, this is so funny. It's so like this is the ultimate like just internet kid in 06, right? Like you're just doing shit with your time on the computer. I'm reading every review of an ROH show by show in order, and I would read the new ones as it came out with no access to these shows and no knowledge of who these people are, right? But for like, if you asked me in 07, I could tell you everything you needed to know about like Nigel McGuinness and Claudio Castagnoli. And I didn't know who the fuck, I didn't know what they looked like. And if you go on the Wikipedia, the Wikipedia page had like the blurriest fucking pictures. You could barely tell, right? Anyways, eventually I remember like having like loose access to pictures or like of ROH stuff, right? And eventually I lucked out and I was like, that's the guy I saw on that fucking weird site. That's Kenta. Okay, Kenta. You know, and it's like, oh, that's Naomichi Marufuji. Okay, I know their names. Like literally just like a year later, like it's like it just fucking hit me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to me trying to find stuff. And then like I try to watch New Japan and I have no fucking way to get there. And I'm just a middle schooler and I don't really know how to get there. And I'm just trying and I'm sifting through the internet and shit and getting viruses on my computer. And eventually I keep going. I keep trying to find things, and I find some Jushin Liger, and I watch everything I could find of Jushin Liger. And now we're in like 08, 09. And by this point, I'm getting a little more savvy, you know what I mean, on getting some brother links, you know what I mean? And so that was a game changer. And so then I watched Liger, and then I watched Otani, and I'm like, oh my God, he's fucking amazing. And like the rest is history. And then the next major canon event in my fandom when it comes to this side of the pond, Joe, I'm on the internet and randomly it says Dragon Gate USA, enter the Dragon, whatever the fuck the show is called, like airing on Go Fight Live.
Yes, I wanted to get to this. Okay, go for it. Yeah.
And there's a trailer for it, and I'm clicking it, and it's like, down here comes the sound, and everyone pounds to this phenomenon. Oh, open your soul, maybe lose control. And you sing all these flippy moves and shit. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Hell yeah. And it came at the right time too, because I was like, I'm done with TNA. This fucking stinks. And I thought WWE was terrible. And I was like, man, I know the wrestling that I want to watch, but I have no way to get to it, right? And I saw this Dragon Gate thingy, and I remember like pressuring my mom. I was like, just help me buy this thing, right? And so we buy fucking this Dragon Gate Go Fight Live show, right? Maybe caught 40% of it, even though I paid legally for it.
Yeah,
right?
Classic vintage Go Fight Live, really. Vintage.
Go Fight Live, yes. But I got to see like Genki Horiguchi and fucking like Shingo Takagi and Yamato and shit like that. And I was like, what is, like, again, it looked foreign to me. I'm like, Masato Yoshino, who I saw in TNA, I was like, oh my God, that's that guy. He's like the fast fucking little guy. But it blew my mind. And I remember, Joe, in my head, like you'll probably never find it, but I'm in the comments. I'm in the YouTube comments of like random YouTube, like these guys are talking like a fucking potato camera, and shit, reviewing stuff.
You're a huge like YouTube review guy, right? You're a huge.
Oh yeah, Truth Slayer, fucking Spinnernet, fucking ROH Styles, Big
You've
Rat.
definitely watched more
pretty
Ring
much,
of Honor YouTube reviews than seen Ring of Honor shows from the 2000s. 100%. You have to have.
At the time, at the time, without question. And I'm in the comments after watching the Dragon Gate thing, like just this stupid kid just writing in like, "This is the best wrestling ever. This is better than anything you've ever seen. I don't want to hear about insert thing. I don't want to hear. I'm like wearing a jersey basically, right?
Mhm.
But like, tragically, Joe, for whatever reason, I just had no access to any more of it. I just had no access to it, and I had no access to the wrestling that I thought was cool. And I was trying to find as much Noah as I could, and it just seemed like I was getting less and less luck. And I wasn't savvy enough to be in the forums of PWO and some of these other places where these guys would probably just point me like, "Dude, here you go." You know what I mean? But I wasn't in those places, and so between that and the Giants making a massive playoff run, and the Knicks signing Amari Stoudemire, I just went, I would fuck wrestling, whatever, fuck, like whatever. And I just shrugged my shoulders and went, "It is what it is, I guess," right? And I just gave up. But the funniest thing, and this is less related to our topic, but I'll just throw it in just to end the story. A couple years later, New Japan World becomes a thing, and I started just watching what they were doing, and I got into that stuff. But then, like, the funniest thing was I missed the whole beginning of like NXT Black and Gold. When I finally started to pay attention, I'm looking at guys, and I'm like Sami Zayn, and I'm like looking at him. I'm like just looking at him. I'm like, wait. And then I'm like going, Sammy.
Seems familiar.
And he goes,
"Wait a second."
I'm like, "Oh, that's El Generic. Oh my god." And then I look at Kevin Owens. I'm like, "That's Kevin Steen." I'm like, hey,
I was
gonna
say that one was easy. You didn't need to be poor for that one.
Right? Yeah. I'm like Kevin Steen, and like I'm seeing like I saw this. I'm like, "Wait, that's Claudio Cast." And it was so funny because what blew my mind about that, you got to understand from my perspective, the WWE that I left was a WWE that would never hire these people, right? So like when I saw that they got hired, like it blew my mind. I was like, "Wait, they got signed by WWE? Like what the hell?"
And to that point, we'll just kind of bridge the gap here a little bit. With access is inherently a big part of any wrestling conversation, right?
Without question.
It's impossible not to, and it's not even a point really to me that it's very difficult to make a sharp point with this because of how much it really entails. But, when you hear Charles describe getting those tapes and waiting and watching the Super J Cup that, he'd heard or read about from 5 years prior. And then when you hear Ibou talking about Go Fight Live and that basically being like putting your money in buying a bunch of lottery tickets and praying. It's impossible not to think about that evolution to now where this morning the Best of Super Juniors final happened and you could just live stream that, watch it on demand, do whatever you want with it. It's like that inherently changes the conversation, right? Like it has to.
Without question.
Yeah, I mean, Match of the Year voting used to stop in mid-November because you needed to give everyone time to watch everything. So technically, the fiscal year for Match of the Year was like November 16th to November 15th of the next year, which I always hated because there were always December matches that I thought should be considered, and they weren't because, just didn't feel right. But yeah, so that only changed. I don't remember exactly what year that changed in the Observer, but I remember there was a crossover. It's like, okay, now we'll just do the calendar year. And yeah.
My goodness. Fascinating stuff. We've got a lot more to talk about, folks. We hope you're enjoying this. If you are, please do like the stream. Couple of super chats. I want to get to our friend Johnny Byrne. He said, enjoy getting yourself with 47. Ibou, go Spurs. Ibou, any official comment on that?
Put it back up.
Yeah.
I'll make one serious point. Well, not two, but like I'll say this. I'm proud of how the Knicks are handling it in the media, Joe. They've been asking our players today, like, "Hey, bro, Trump's gonna be there, bro. Thoughts, bro?" And they're all just kind of like, "Look, man, I'm just happy for New York. I'm happy for New York. I'm happy for the city. I'm happy for the fans that've been waiting for this game." Like they're all doing that pivot.
Has Mitchell Robinson spoken yet?
On TikTok comments, yes. He some guy posted a TikTok of Iverson crossing up Jordan, and they went, "There's gonna be Mitch in front of Trump," and he wrote like, "Hell yeah." You damn
Oh,
right.
man. There it is.
Look, I think it's pretty lame that a billionaire could just be friends with like another rich person who's the president and go, I want you at my game, so I'm going to ruin the fan experience for everybody else. And so now that like all these cool things that were happening in the city have to be canceled just to accommodate this one guy. But what do I know?
Yeah, I don't think you got any arguments on that one. Our friend, the great John Burr, says, and I quote, I'm here for Tanae getting his flowers. Is he the last colour guy to not just be an extension of whomever's on headset at Gorilla? That would be I would like us to do this special one day, this same lineup for just commentary, because I think we could do endless hours on what that actually means, right? And Ibou could take the blame for Joey Styles and all sorts of stuff. He also says, oh, how Charles, but I'm worried Ibou's going to eat him up without Donnie coming in for the hot tag. As I said, someone said it here, this was the funniest chat we've got all year. Let's throw this on the screen. Damn, Ibou can still be a good podcast when he wants to be, huh? It's like when a guy would go back to the Indies, Ibou, and do all the old moves. It's good stuff, man. I'm proud of him. Very proud of him. Thank you, John. We love you very much. Okay, so I want us to talk about, you mentioned the 2010s when you came back to Black and Gold, Ibou. And I was thinking a lot about this the other day when I was trying to get in the headspace for this show. I kind of think that crazy indie boom of the mid-2010s produced the closest equivalent to what was happening 20 years prior in terms of that, crop of guys that all came in together and worked. Right? And the reason this came to mind for me was, yes, the mid-2000s, obviously, but what makes the mid-2010s interesting is that is in the midst of a New Japan boom. And so if you look at the New Japan Junior Division in the mid-2010s, you look at the Bucks, you look at Omega, Ricochet, Red Dragon, the Hooligans, the Time Splitters. It was kind of, again, it's not a perfect comparison, but there was kind of the element of what you saw 20 years prior in New Japan kind of hosting this artistic revolution, so on and so forth. But again, to kind of further the contrast in what we talked about earlier, at that time, the IWGP champion is AJ Styles. And so that's an interesting kind of thing to marry, right? Like, oh, this is familiar, this less so. Charles, how much of that stuff would you have seen, that kind of mid-2010s, the indie boom that also was able to be part of that New Japan explosion globally? How much of that would have made it your way, mate?
Well, it's funny when you said the phrase indie boom and then you started talking about the mid-2010s. I'm like, in my mind, the indie boom is King of the Indies in 2001 and the rise of all these new independents and this whole kind of wrestling economy that developed that was completely separate from WWE. And it happened during a time, Noah was hot and there was good stuff happening, but it happened during a time when there was less good stuff happening internationally, at least in some cases, than there would have been 10 years earlier or 10 years later. So, yeah, so it makes sense when you say that there is a parallel just because, women's wrestling is doing really well. Independent wrestling is doing well. The Japanese scene is doing well too. So, So what was the question exactly? I just want to make sure.
How much of it made it your way, the actual work from that time in the mid-2010s? Ricochet stuff. So.
Yeah, it did. I saw almost all of it. I don't know. I that's a tough one. Like, I don't want to disparage. Right. But my initial reaction was just like, give me my Liger, give me my Otani. Yeah. Like, it was more like that than it was, really loving it. I appreciate it now. Obviously, it's been pretty influential and it had a huge impact. At the time, though, I was not a huge fan of it.
Right.
Just because to me, I felt like it had gotten so much into the athletic and acrobatic side of it that there was no sense of I'm struggling to apply things. I'm having a competitive match. This is intense. It felt like some of that was lost, and maybe that's unfair. Like, in hindsight, if I watched it now, I may not feel that way, but I did feel that way at the time.
Well, that's why I sent it your way, in the sense that, I know you well enough to know you wasn't going to just hand wave it. But the reason I think it's interesting is, and the reason I brought up AJ, is I think that crop, of which I'm very fond, and for me that's a part of my fandom because I fell in love with New Japan, in real time. Because obviously, again, we mentioned Access, right? New Japan World. Suddenly I can watch these Bullet Club matches, you hear about the t-shirt and all that good stuff, and suddenly it's on the screen, live. But the reason I think it's an interesting contrast is, I do think that's an era in which there is more emphasis, I'll be very careful how I word this, I think the ratio of innovation and execution, I think, leaned far more towards innovation. And that's not inherently a negative, but I do think it became more about how much stuff rather than how it was done and why it was done. I think would be a line I personally draw. Does that make sense to you, Charles? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it may get me roasted, but like things like the famous like Osprey landing on his feet over Ibushi's
Right.
shoulder, like stuff like
Mhm.
that. Like to me, that felt very sports entertainment because it's
Right.
relying on the camera to get over the thing. Like, and I'm just like, wait, it's supposed to be something different from WWE, and yeah, it is different in terms of what they're doing, but in terms
Right.
of how they're presenting wrestling, it didn't. It just didn't feel like it was being presented like as serious wrestling, which is what I always preferred. But but yeah, I mean, I like I said, I mean, I'm not the target audience at that point, so I get it. It has a place, and you know, wrestling moves on with or without me. But
Yeah.
that's kind of where I was at that point.
And what I find interesting is, meanwhile, I think the IWGP title matches that say, you know, AJ had with an Ibushi was actually probably more spiritually in line with the junior heavyweight title matches of 20 years prior in terms of,
Yes.
you know, AJ, especially
Yes.
at that point, has more of an emphasis on how hard he's hitting guys, that struggle you mentioned, right? It's just interesting how these things change through the years. Ibou, you're a big New Japan guy. That era you and I have talked about, we love that kind of early, you know, the first half of the 2010s in particular.
Mhm.
It's interesting to me. I think the juniors were a big part of that, but I also think it was definitely, to Charles' point, different to what we were talking about from 20 years prior, right? Like, it was a different thing. It was a little bit more sideshow, and I think that's inherently negative, but I think it was. What do you think, Ibou?
Yeah, when I think about like getting into the 2010s New Japan product, like it was definitely driven by just the main event scene, to be honest. And I like the stuff that I was seeing in the Never division, which when you watch a lot of New Japan, you realize that historically that like the Never division really it felt like a way for the old New Japan to live on in some form,
Yeah.
in a more streamlined, almost like fast food way. Like it was almost like, hey man, you remember when Choshu and Hashimoto would wrestle? Well, here's a 14-minute kind of sped up version of that with Ishii and fucking Kojima or whoever. So that's what that always felt like to me. Like the more that I watch New Japan Pro Wrestling, and when I think about it, like it was that division in the main event scene that really was like the strength of the product for me at the time. I liked what I liked the tag stuff. I liked the junior tag stuff. I liked the juniors. But yes, it was sideshow in the sense that look at Wrestle Kingdom 10, for example.
Right.
It opens with that 4-way junior tag where it's like Seidel and Ricochet, the Bucks, you know, Roppongi, and I can't remember the fourth team. And it's like this is just meant to kind of warm you up a bit, you know what I mean? Get your belly warm, get your appetite going, and then we're going to see some wrestling for the rest of the night. And it's not bad. And actually, at the time, as a young adult, you know, watching that, like I thought it was fucking awesome. But like now, when I watch like the show back, like it's just kind of like, you know, what I mean, it's
Right.
perfunctory is maybe a bit extreme.
Right. It's pretty better than that, but I get your point. And
Yeah, it's closer to perfunctory than it is seminal. You know what I'm saying? So
But
yeah.
when we're talking evolution, that's pivotal and pick up from here, Ibou. But, you know, that I think is a natural, and that's an improvement on everyone climbing big structures. I think that's in
I
that
agree.
lane, though, right? Where it's a novelty on the show, right?
I was gonna say, so it's almost a similar thing mentality wise, but they're not making them do that because New Japan just they never really been that type of company, and also to this day they just they don't structure their shows like that where it's like, okay, opener, everybody just like die, and then like, okay, then we do this, and then we do this other crazy thing, then we like pull it back down. Like they don't really do that type of up and down card structure. They just kind of ascend. So they don't really do that, but it is similar in that there's a sideshow vibe to where it's like, all right, now this is where like Ricochet will do his thing and Kushida does his thing. But with that said, though, Kushida was an excellent junior wrestler.
Yeah.
That I didn't really appreciate that much at the time.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The junior that caught my eye at the time and really made me go like, let's sit up and go like, hold on, like let me, really take this division seriously. It wasn't Kenny Omega in real time, nor was it Kushida. It was Hiromu Takahashi. And I think because on some level he had what Liger had, totally different wrestlers. Like I said at the top of the show, uh, Liger was a star. Liger carried himself like a star. He acted like a star. He was over at a main event level and could main event any New Japan show should he wanted to, and he did main event some New Japan shows, numerous to be in fact. And I thought Hiromu from day one when he walked in as Hiromu from his excursion had very similar qualities. And I remember watching him work Kushida, and I'm like, this guy's like different. And I don't really feel the same way about him now. Obviously, look, the years have not been super kind to his body. But that first year, when he bursted on the scene and he's doing these sunset flip power bombs to the floor,
Yeah.
and he's so charismatic and he has that really distinct look to him, it was like, hold on, the juniors have something here. And he didn't innovate from like a stylistic standpoint. He wouldn't have been like, he would have fit in a match with Taiji Ishimori and Noah in like 2008, but like he did have a certain flair to him that like New Japan rarely would see from that division specifically. To be honest, aesthetically, he felt like a guy you would have seen in like a Noah or Dragon Gate, to be honest, from just because like I remember like one of Misawa's big things when Noah started was that in All Japan there were like restrictions on how you could even like dress and carry yourself when you walked out to the ring. You couldn't wear a chain, you couldn't wear certain types of jackets or just gear. You know what I mean? Like it's a really small thing, but it's also why like, and when Noah came in, he was like, it was like new millennium, like aesthetically we have to be hip. You know what I mean? There's almost like a hip hop flair to the aesthetics of some of these wrestlers, and that's why you start getting those long flare pants that everybody would fucking wear, or like guys wearing chains, or guys wearing hats, or certain things like that. And Kenta took advantage of that, and Marufuji and all these other guys, and they all look like fucking like Japanese fucking pop stars and shit. But anyway, New Japan, while not as restrictive as All Japan when it came to that, they were also pretty traditional, and their wrestlers looked relatively traditional, and it did feel like Hiromu like brought some swag visually. And so that was something I just think about, and I noticed as I'm talking my way through this. And so that's what I think of when I think of June 2010's New Japan Wrestling.
Go for it, Charles.
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the interesting things to comparing Japan to the United States. There are enough traditionalists to counterbalance things in Japan. Those people aren't always here in positions of power in the United States. So, sometimes some of the excess is cut off. Sometimes, some things are preserved that need to be preserved. Yes, we want to innovate. There are certain things that also still need to be here as part of that create a through line, that provide a way in for people who became fans in a different generation when things were different. They still feel like there's continuity because certain things are preserved. That, I don't know that anyone in the US, there haven't been as many people, at least in positions of power, that have taken that position or that have had the ability to do that even. So that's probably the big difference between the two countries as far as, how they handle innovation.
You know what's funny about that, Charles? Joe, like when I think about this, it almost feels like these companies, they don't want to like rattle or offend like the old Japanese salaryman that just kind of wants to see some wrestling that he remembers. It almost feels like
it's true. It's true.
They keep in mind, right, the 60-year-old bloke that like watched wrestling usually 30, 40 years ago, right? They want you to sit down and watch it. It almost feels like they've considered like the idea of them maybe sitting down and going, what the fuck is this, man? I'm like, oh my God.
I mean, there's something to be said for the idea that if you're going to change, let's bring everyone with us, or let's try to anyway. We may not, but we're going to try. And I mean, I think that's a great way to frame it.
And so because of that, like a lot of these promotions, there's still at least a decent element of their show that's very much wrestling the way you remember it. And so like there's always going to be certain structural tenets to a Japanese main event in a New Japan show or an All Japan show or a Noah show, where it's like, don't worry, settle in, sir. It's okay. Like, do it how you remember. There's going to be some things on this show that might scare you a little bit, but it's okay. Hang tight. there's going to be some things that you can go like, okay, I know him. Remember that. I remember these things in matches. There's a collar and elbow here. Okay, cool. The idea is bothering me because there's a lot of old men that go to Japanese wrestling shows.
Oh yeah, and they always have their arms folded. To go, and the other thing that really makes, I think, the mid 2010s an interesting comparison and contrast, the mid 90s. In the States, what happens, right, is that all this noise outside. Oh, we have to do a cruiserweight tournament. We've got to bring some cruiserweights in-house. And that is such an interesting line to draw when looking back at Nitro. So, 1995, one of the big things for Nitro is we're going to bring in international talent. And then in 96, obviously, the cruiserweight division really explodes. 2016, there is so much buzz about international wrestling and the wider wrestling world. They do a Cruiserweight Classic, which was a huge thing for the WWE Network. And I have to say, I find this to just be a fascinating subject in the sense that, by contrast, and I see there's someone that loved that tournament and thought the world of it, it's been 10 years, and guys, that feels like something that's a lost chapter. And the reason for that is what followed it, right? It's almost like if the Super J Cup isn't on that level, but you get my point. Imagine if the Super J Cup was followed by guys wrestling an hour free to silence and then just went away. It's like, you wouldn't think of it the same way. Ibou said earlier, that tournament was when guys becoming legends. In a different way, unfortunately, the complete opposite end of the scale is the Cruiserweight Classic rocked the smart fans' world, and then was a thing that within 6 months people were going, oh man, that was a fun thing anyway. And so much so, Charles, I don't even know if that has like a streaming home. I don't even know if you can legally access that.
I was going to say, I don't think it does at this point.
And you never see people posting like, where is it, right? Everyone's just... it's come and gone. It's like
it was a novelty, not the beginning of the change.
Yeah,
well, I guess there was that period for a while where WWE would do the different colored mat.
Yes,
they would do the
purple ropes and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, Charles, where do you stand on this? Do you think it could have been a change? Do you think it could have been a long-term thing? Was it a case of they missed on that, or was it? Again, to use the same comparison, was it inevitable that in a world where Daniel Bryan had been king just a couple of years prior, it wasn't the same thing and fans wouldn't see it as being different the way they saw it as different 20 years prior? What do you think?
I think maybe it was overthought a little bit, and that kind of sunk it. Like, it's not like you're not like, there's no reason for culture shock. You're just watching wrestling. Yeah. And so I don't know that like differentiating is as important. Like, you can do it. There's nothing wrong with doing it. But when it becomes the priority over just presenting what's good, I think that's where it goes wrong. It's, and it goes back to the issue that happened, I think, to an extent late in the WCW stuff. Like, it's not this unknowable thing. It's just pro wrestling. Like, you don't have to make it seem like there's a barrier to entry or that it's extremely hard to understand, because it's not, just it's just wrestling, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it was helped by the fact that look, Kevin Owens is doing what Rich Swann is doing, not literally move for move, but like,
right. It is difficult, right? It's a different thing for sure. Yeah.
They knew who Kevin Owens was and Sami Zayn and Seth Rollins, and these guys are doing similar things to what Rich Swann and who's another name I could do? TJP were doing, and the fans didn't know who those guys were, and they made it so foreign and alien and other that they changed the rope colors when it came on, and they didn't have those guys interact with the wider roster. Like, they didn't
its own world. Yeah.
That would just come on Raw, and they expected people to kind of go like, "Oh, cool." And it's like, the truth is, maybe they would have had a fighting chance if they were wrestling in Full Sail University the entire time, but they were not. And from the get go, it was like that. And also, to be honest, with Ibushi choosing not to sign and Zach choosing not to sign, and some of
they were short a couple scorers, weren't they? They definitely were.
Typically, scorers that like could become stars.
Yes. Charles, what were you gonna say, mate?
I was just going to say, I think it's hard to do this also after Daniel Bryan headlines at WrestleMania, because at that point, weight divisions are kind of a thing of the past, at least in the US, because now you have people who fit that 205 description who are at, the very top of pro wrestling. So what is the point of separating them at that point?
The funniest ever, 2018, AJ Styles is the WWE champion. Buddy Murphy is the cruiserweight champion.
And
I mean, you put those guys next to each other, and that math isn't going to work out necessarily in your head. And that's to your point. Ibou, what was you going to say?
no, that's exactly true. When you watch a 1996 Nitro, you can go, okay, Rey Mysterio is smaller than Kevin Nash. Okay,
Yes.
like this guy is in the main event, this guy is not. When you watch a Raw in 2017, you know, Pac, or then known as Neville, is like, is he really like that far off from? I know he's short, but is he that far off physically from, Finn Balor? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Balor's the one who's like the push wrestler. So it's very weird from that standpoint. And I think that was where I think we reached an inflection point where it was like, is there a need for cruiserweight wrestling in this way, in the sense of presenting it as an isolated division away from what you do? And if so, is this the optimal way to present and showcase it?
Yeah, because then it becomes not a weight class, but a card position.
Yes.
Which is not what you want it to be.
Right.
Oh no, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why it's like, since it's like and much less successful than even like an X division, which had like a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was like, then what even is this adding to the show?
Right.
It was just good mid card, undercard guys wrestling that like or not over.
Yeah, the most success their cruiserweight division had was when it was completely discarded and was its own show. And even then, that wasn't the success of like a revolutionary division so much as it was the classic WWE tradition of the show that Vince doesn't care about is good, which is one of the great, which now they're actually replicating in a tribute fashion, which I appreciate. That's one of the great traditions, and 205 Live got to live that in about 2018. But yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's why I found this topic so intriguing. Today, of course, was the Best Series final, but also we're a couple weeks removed from a major pay-per-view that sold out in New York and had an incredible crowd, main evented by Darby Allin and MJF, who, in fear of talking out of turn, are not the biggest fellas. They're not, they're not super heavyweights by any means. And I think, that this whole conversation can't be divorced from that, right? Like that evolution. But what's interesting is you still see fans occasionally wrestle with it, in the sense of like when Darby won the belt, there's this thing of, in fear of getting off the rails, but this is the late night, what we do. When Darby won the belt, there was that thing of Darby's not a world champion. And it's, with respect, every possible metric we have would suggest, in fact, that actually he's a very suitable world champion.
No.
But he's small. And it kind of makes you think about, like, that's still there in people's minds, right? Like, it's still there, it's wired in, it's baked in for a lot of fans. I don't even mean that as a criticism, it's just, it's interesting, Charles, right? We've discussed this evolution through time. MJF and Darby Allin is, in a different world, would have been an awesome kick-ass match for the WCW Cruiserweight title, dare I say, and Max would have been in the Jericho spot of the personality of the division, or whatever it would be.
I mean, I remember when they had their opening match at Full Gear 2021, that was my thought. This feels like an opening to a WCW pay-per-view, but just one that evolved into this. Like, it was great. Yeah, I think that was Full Gear when they had that match. And I always think, so there are two ways to do it. Like, you can look at it as size doesn't matter. I do think it does, but I don't think it matters in the way that, like fans, I think now will accept wrestlers who are big and small and all that. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean if you're small, you can't be a star. But I think that sometimes gets carried over to, oh, well, Brody King, just throw out a random name, should be working even with someone who's like way smaller than him. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's a valuable storytelling device, and it should still be used as a storytelling device. It doesn't mean that you present the smaller guys as less than, but it does mean that it's a factor in the match. And especially
I do think we got a
visual difference. So
and out to your point, Loss, I felt like we got away from that in the previous decade, because in pursuit of wrestling equality from a booking standpoint, and the Smarks winning the almost culture war with just the conventional views of professional wrestling, it then veered into this interesting direction where, and I'm sure you could speak to this, Joe, like big men became bad to certain crowds of people. And then for them to be accepted by certain crowds of people, they have to then wrestle like the little guys to then get the acceptance.
Yeah, which was really gross. A gross time we all lived through. That was a terrible
Right.
time.
And then it was a thing of like, again, we had this like weird like equality thing specifically in a match structure way where like, again, a small guy would just go 50-50 with like a guy who like it visually doesn't really make sense for that to happen. And so it was an interesting and strange place because you couldn't criticize that at the time, I remember, without people going like, it's not the 80s, bro. Da, 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 da. And it's like, well, I'm not saying that. And I have no problem with Matt Sydal. I'm just saying, you know, maybe if Matt Sydal is wrestling insert guy, like that, their physical differences should weigh into how they approach wrestling each other, and you can create something interesting out of that. You know, it just is like a random example.
And it's worth saying, if it didn't play into a Matt Sydal match, it's more likely because the big man wanted to show he could do it, quote unquote, right? Than it is. I'm sure Matt Sydal was fully aware I could just sell, really, but it's
right. But
Dijak
wants to keep Oh, there you go.
Darby Allin is a great example of what you're describing, though, Charles, right? He's a man who wrestles with full awareness of his size. He bounces around for guys.
And because he's so resourceful and fast, that's what makes him a threat. So he's a threat to any wrestler of any size. But if he's facing a Brody King, he's going to have to tackle that differently than he would facing MJF. And I think that's important. And that's what we want, you know, because otherwise all the matches are the same.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. So I guess, you know, we're going to circle back here in a moment because we're winding down, folks. Time's flown by. We've had a wonderful time. I hope you've all enjoyed this. But at the end, I want us to just kind of shout out some other names that we haven't had a chance to speak about. Before we do, is what we just described, that feels like the solution, right? It's not, you know, in this day and age, I don't know if the approach to this topic, especially in America, we'll say stateside for this, I don't know if the approach to this topic should be, how can we get back to where things were? I think this is actually a case of fans are accepting, rightly, and now for 2 decades have been trained that the smaller guys can be top guys. Work that into your match and embrace it. Don't hide away from it, I think is the conclusion, if there is one, right, Charles? That seems to be where we're at on this one.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I remember, and it's funny because it's actually where we started, because Shawn Michaels always talked about how early in his career, before he went to WWE, that was always the mindset. They would face a team that was much bigger than them. They're like, oh, that's going to make the match better because of the contrast. Yep. And I think that's kind of where we should be now.
I agree. Ibou, when we think of someone like an Eddie Guerrero, a personal favorite for us both, I know, and for most wrestling fans, you know, we think about those matches with his stylistic peers, right? The guys that he could trade the brainbusters with and the arm drags. But he also made magic when he could be in there with a bully like a JBL, right? And that kind of inherently captures the point being made here. Ibou in 2026 is what Charles and I described. Is that the way to go? It isn't about weight limits, it's about no limits. Am I right?
Yes, and Eddie was just exemplary of being able to do everything, just everything out there on in a wrestling ring.
Did you ever see his match against the Big Show?
Which one?
At the Eddie match. It was a title defense on SmackDown. It's so good.
I have a thing I'm working for an asset. So I probably haven't got to it, but his TV stuff is like blown me away. To be honest,
it's so watchable. What I love about it has that Bret Hart quality of I love wrestlers who, like, there's so much individualism in each little match.
Yeah,
in that they're not just going out there and doing their routine every night. And I'm not even saying that's inherently bad. There's wrestlers that do that have good matches like all the time.
Absolutely.
You know, but like with Eddie, he very much would go, this match is its own thing compared to the last match I did. And I'm going to have a match with Big Show that I won't have with Orlando Jordan, you know? Right. So,
and for the conversation we're having here, one that I saw that really stood out to me for this particular topic, when he just turns heel in 05, and you know, when he's working with that real mean streak, that real edge, he has a TV match with Paul London, which is so interesting for this subject matter because it's like Paul London suddenly is the rah-rah babyface, the small babyface bouncing around getting beat up by the big heel, and it was just like, man, the way everyone's career goes, you end up in the spot that you once, you end up kicking ass in that way that once you're on the other end of the hammer and the now, if you will.
You know who's some
Fascinating stuff. Go for it.
The squared circle of life.
Yes, sir. What's up, Ibou?
as we enter the fourth quarter here, one of the names that I'd like to throw out there,
Please, yeah.
pivotal for just the development of this style. Unquestionably, we have to mention the recently as in like in the last year, Gran Hamada, who by simply being too small to be used properly in a Japanese promotion, had no choice but to go to Mexico to work. And he took everything that he learned in all the dojos that he was wrestling in, and everything that he learned and knew from the promotions that he worked in, and he brought it over to Mexico. And then when he made his own school and created, Universal Lucha Libre in Japan, indirectly completely changed pro wrestling. It's completely changed pro wrestling. And the amount of students that came out of that, and guys like the Michinoku Pro Crew and Ultimo Dragon, who was the first big standout that ultimately got a gig elsewhere. You have to mention Gran Hamada when you're telling the story of junior heavyweight pro wrestling. And he's still one of my favorite guys actually to go back and watch. There's a lot of missing footage with Hamada that maybe Charles could help me with, but or hard to find footage with Hamada from 80s. But he's one of those guys that if you want to watch him to do some like just tape study, that's not a guy that I would go to cage match for. That's a guy where if you just see his name in the video, you click the video.
Have a look at it.
Yeah.
Just look at it. An excellent pro wrestler. The dude was like 5 feet tall, I think, or something like that. So he was short as shit. But powerful, strong, dynamic, a great base, could also do his own creative stuff. A hybrid worker that then taught that to other guys. Hamada was the fucking man.
Yeah. It actually is an interesting sidebar, and I guess it's another show for another day, but it is interesting. I read someone posted about how, there was a question of why Lucha Libre suffered somewhat in this latest GWE. And it was said that Lucha is not as chronicled by like the cage match guide. Because that is how a lot of like, if you're trying to do a GWE ballot and you have a year before ballots on it, you're going to go to the best wrestlers and hit their like highest rated stuff, right? And I think Lucha is probably, it's less chronicled in that circle than like New Japan is or All Japan, right? So it's interesting. To your point, Charles, are there any wrestlers here as we wind down, we're in the final couple rounds here, that you would just like to acknowledge as being part of your fandom that come to mind when it comes to junior heavyweight wrestling? I'm intrigued.
Naoki Sano would be a
Yes.
villain in 1989-90. The feud with Liger, I think that was the feud where Liger really found himself and Sano at the time was probably the best high flyer anywhere in wrestling. He was fantastic, and that series was incredible. So that would be someone that would stand out for me. Otani, who I mentioned in passing, is probably my all-time favorite. Kanemoto. There's a match that El Samurai had against Otani in January of '96. They were doing the New Japan versus UWFI feud, and it gave this whole other possible alternate timeline of what junior heavyweight wrestling could be, because it was the shooty style, but it was mixed in with the New Japan junior style. It was this whole other thing. It's like, man, can you imagine? Like, that match to me feels like a what if, because it's incredible. So that stands out. Obviously, in Michinoku Pro, you have all of those guys, Terry Boy, Taka Michinoku, Sasuke. So like all of those guys are awesome. So many more that I'm not mentioning. I always had a soft spot for Yakushiji, who was even undersized in Michinoku Pro. There's so many. I love the Osaka Pro stuff too, with Super Dolphin. Togo is an all-time great. I could be here for a while. I'll stop there.
I love it. Ibou, I knew as soon as Charles started that he was speaking your language, right? It was
Yeah, 100%. I love that El Samurai match. Otani is incredible, and what's incredible about him also is he like totally reinvents the style in '01, and it remains a incredible professional wrestler in a totally different way. But
2 careers, impressive.
two completely different careers, two careers that the second would have still been going now had he not had his tragic injury. Um, you named, without realizing it, you named him and Kanemoto back to back. Those are two guys that had like excellent junior heavyweight epics in early '97 with Liger. And I always remember those matches because Liger had his like, I forgot what was Liger's injury in like what 95, 96. He had like some big issue.
He had a benign brain tumor.
That's what it was. Yeah. And he came back and he wasn't quite the same guy in terms of his style. But he kind of showed that like he could just wrestle in a weird way. He kind of just became like his version of like later Hiroshi Tanahashi from that point onward. But he had these two back-to-back like great junior heavyweight epics that were like 30 minutes long. That I always just found super notable. Kanemoto was a great asshole, just a great fucking asshole with a mean streak. Big fan of him. He's, to be honest, an underrated Tiger Mask. Like, obviously Tiger Mask 3 is not Tiger Mask 1. Oh, I'm sorry. I gotta reply. Jesus. I gotta reply to a text. My apologies.
okay. Yeah, you do think. God only knows. All right, so it is though. It's one of those things. It's an endless. I mean, we haven't even discussed the Dynamite Kid. Has not even come up on this program, and I think Charles, you know better than me as someone that has seen the way people engage with footage. That still, I think, makes it to like the guide of what you're supposed to watch when you become like a nerdy wrestling fan, right?
Yeah, it seems like, and I have a different perspective on this than I think some people who were kind of in my fandom age or whatever. So basically, there was this period where it was the greatest thing ever. Then there was this period where there was a backlash to it because it's been topped. My take on it is that they had to do the matches that they did, because if they hadn't, then nothing that happened after would have happened after. So it's natural to me that Liger ended up being better than Tiger Mask, but Liger wouldn't have existed without Tiger Mask. So I appreciate their role for kind of breaking a barrier there, because I mean, a lot of the matches that they had that were like such a wow factor at the time, you watch them now and maybe they're not so much, but I still think they have a really valuable and important place because of what they inspired.
Yeah. I still think there's some of that. I still think there's a lot you can take from those matches watching them today for the first time, I think.
And I should mention my favorite, if you want Tiger Mask that holds up, my favorite is him against Kobayashi, Kuniaki Kobayashi. Yes. They had a series in late 82, early 83, and I think it's awesome. Dynamite worked really well with him also. So Kobayashi is another name that we should probably mention. I think he just passed away last year, I want to say.
Yeah, Kuniaki Kobayashi. Yeah. I actually love Sayama. He's actually still one of my favorite juniors to go back and watch. Something about his work. It makes me really sad that he just kind of put the gloves down, so to speak, so early in his career. And in a weird way, the reason why he did it speaks to kind of what the story of like the junior heavyweight wrestler experience in the industry. Because Sayama, on some level, always felt like he was a clown or a sideshow, and I think he resented it, because he was the guy that brought the younger audience into the New Japan show. And he was the guy that would open the show up and do all these cool things. But Inoki had no real interest in pushing him as a main event guy. And this bothered Sayama, a guy who had some legitimate credibility and some real background there and could do certain things. And the idea that he was the fact that he knew there was a hard ceiling on what he would be in New Japan Pro Wrestling bothered him. And, famously, Inoki refused a public challenge from Sayama to fight or wrestle him or whatever, and caused him to move on and do his own thing. And then, the early iterations of the UWF with him involved kind of sputtered. But it speaks to kind of, again, the stigma. But I love Sayama. And again, another guy that I watch him work, like this wrestler named Babyface, or whoever. Yes. Babyface, very good wrestler. I love all that type of stuff. You mentioned the Naoki Sano thing. That program was big for Liger because Liger in his first year is fun, but there's almost an exhibition quality to his matches, and it's the oohs and the ahs, and that's cool. But I felt like Sano summoned a mean streak out of him that people maybe didn't realize was there. And I feel like coming out of that big famous match in 1990 where his mask is ripped off and he's bleeding and you realize it's Keiichi Yamada, um, I feel like from that point onward, Liger kind of displayed that he could have like again the big main event like long epic match. And I don't know if he got that working, in Latin America. I don't know where he took that from. But to me, I don't know if I was actually ever impressed with Liger physically, personally. I always felt like even for his own period, there were juniors that were maybe quicker or sharper or more athletic or more spectacular. But with Liger, it was very much a how he did things and when he did things and how he could get the people to connect with him. And in those ways, he kind of feels like a main event lucha babyface, in my opinion. So that's what stands out about Jushin Liger. Again, you mentioned Kanemoto and Otani, two guys that are fucking awesome. As we get later into the period, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention guys like Dr. Wagner Jr., who was so fucking good. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention guys that like super underrated for the time. Tatsuhito Takaiwa was fucking he was so fucking good. This 28-year-old guy who was balding severely and looked like he hated his life, and he's in black trunks with no elbow pads or wrist tape, and he was just mean. He wrestled honestly. It's almost like a junior heavyweight version of like Masanobu Fuchi or something, because he was so like if you watch like Takaiwa in the late 90s, he wrestles like those traditional Puro uncles that hated their life. And it's like, dude, you're 27. Like, what's the big deal, man? Like, relax. Takai was fantastic. Guys like Kendo Kashin kind of had a run in the late 90s, and I thought he was pretty solid. New Japan introduces junior tag belts, I think, in 98.
Yes.
And that was pretty big from a match structure standpoint.
Minoru Tanaka was
Tanaka.
really good. Yeah, even though I didn't like the Heat gimmick very much, I did like him just before that and after that.
Absolutely. And again, when you go to that 90s New Japan Junior division, like there's a lot to fucking like, dude. Pegasus, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Pegasus. Another just excellent pro wrestler. And what I thought was interesting was he's involved in a lot of tags that are like interdivision. A lot of interdivision tags, matches that involve like the Steiner brothers that are really, really fun, that utilize the different styles to do all these kind of cool creative things. So it's worth mentioning him. Obviously Black Tiger, Eddie Guerrero was great as Black Tiger, but also like obviously Raka is fun. Like that's kind of my wheelhouse, and I love the 90s New Japan Juniors. There's a couple like attempts at working relationships with other promotions that they try. Like in 97, there's a couple interpromotional tags between New Japan and Michinoku Pro. There's one like 8-man that I forgot who's in the match like exactly, but it's like really, really fun. And it's at like a notable show. I think one of them is at the same show where Ogawa faces Hashimoto. But maybe like May 97.
They also tried a partnership with Big Japan, so there are
and Tajiri's on.
Yes, Liger and Otani against Tajiri, and I forget who his partner was, but yeah, so there's some interesting stuff during that time for sure. And I think it's good that existed, and the reason I say that is because All Japan was famously more, especially under Baba, more isolationist. They didn't really work with anyone else. Did a little bit at times, but not too much. Where New Japan was far more willing to do interpromotional feuds and bring in outside talent and that sort of thing.
Especially once it showed that it was able to make money. Like I think the biggest thing about the Super Jacob show from a domestic standpoint was that it was a proof of concept. I thought it was like a real like this can make money, so we should like put resources into it. And it felt like that was Liger then going, all right, and it's almost like he showed the office like, no, this guy could be something and this guy could be something. And obviously great Sasuke became a regional star and then he became a bigger name. And then there's obviously the famous Michinoku Pro Show these days from '96 that did that huge house and I believe Ryogoku.
Yes.
In Ryogoku, they do a huge house in there, and that show itself is almost like, in a weird way, it almost feels like canonically in the story of wrestling. That show, doing as well as it did in Ryogoku, felt like self-reference. It felt like the genre itself going, let's celebrate the last like 15 years of what we've done. Let's pull some guys from the past. Dynamite Kid's on that show, like Mike Jackson's on that show, and all these other. I think
Johnny Saint
is on the show. It's in '96. It is self-celebration for a style that has come a long way. What I do want to mention is there's the extreme element of this too, because FMW tried all kinds of different things in its history, but when they attempted like juniors or light heavyweights or whatever you'd like to call it, again, they tried all kinds of different things under the sun, and they used belts from Puerto Rico and belts that were fake belts that didn't really actually exist, but they pretended were from other countries. All kinds of weird. Onito was a lunatic, but Hayabusa is absolutely a part of this story.
Yeah,
and he was a mix of the spectacular, and he also did just the insane shit. And he was such a fun wrestler, and it felt like a great Sasuke almost to the extreme. But I bring him up not to even talk about his FMW stuff, which is like fun, but his All Japan run is interesting to me because I actually think him and Jinsei Shinzaki's tag work is like fucking great in All Japan, and their matches across like their matches against I believe it's Misawa and Akiyama, I think is one.
Yes, and then also Kawada and Taue, and the whole dynamic of, are they going to win? This isn't. Yeah, it was great.
It's great, but what's so cool about it is in that setting, especially again, like I mentioned earlier, like these guys like are dressed and look traditional in All Japan Pro Wrestling. So when somebody that looks like Shinzaki walks in and somebody that looks like Hayabusa walks in, it feels like people from totally different like social circles or scenes. And when they walk into the setting, like there's like oohs and ahs in the crowd, just sort of like, what even is this? And like you can tell it's a different audience. They're just like, whoa. And we know that in Japanese wrestling with the different cultures of fandom, there are certain fandoms in Japanese wrestling that like see that FMW stuff and think it's like absolute garbage, like complete garbage. That's why an Onita would get booed sometimes in other shows. But seeing Hayabusa walk in from a totally different sphere and do his Hayabusa shit and get like oohs and ahs in the Budokan is the coolest fucking thing ever. And that's almost a little bit of an image of what could have been, because the truth is All Japan tries to do some of that type of stuff in the late 90s. Like, all right, let's try to branch out a little bit, but it feels like an old man trying to like keep up with the cool kids. It's kind of weird
listening to a new pop tune.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, like you go to the place and they're just like, wop, bam, loo, bam, wop, bam. And you turn on a new thing and out of nowhere, like DMX comes on and you're like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is kind of, you know what I mean? And, but, I was
just going to say, I feel like I don't even have to ask this, but are you as high as I am on the New Japan versus Noah junior tags in like 0203 with,
Noah saved that crop of guys, because the truth is when Inoki soured on them, like there's not much of note or interest in the early 2000s from the juniors within their own promotion because they were institutionally de-emphasized. But what they did was a lot of them just kind of went to Noah and did their thing. That's some of Liger's best stuff.
Yeah, he became a total heel, like just a great heel.
Becomes a bully invading heel in Noah.
Yes.
And to fast forward like 04, that big match at the Tokyo Dome with Yoshinobu Kanemaru is tremendous. It's tremendous. And it's a group of dudes that went over. That stuff is great. So yeah, I love that program and the tags. I'd recommend like any one of them.
I knew this was going to happen. I was so excited about it because we've talked in a group chat a little bit, but this is the first time Charles and Ibou have really had a chance to speak, and I knew this would be what would be the result of that, and I was excited for it. What an education. I was happy to just sit back and let you guys do your thing, Bunch of stuff for me to watch just in the last 50 minutes, folks. We hope you enjoyed it. I think it's fair to say we've uncovered something here. There's some potential in us doing this every once in a while, right? Maybe we do a tag team special, maybe a women's wrestling special, maybe an announcing special I mentioned earlier. Maybe even, because this is something we've talked about a lot privately, a television wrestling special. We just talk formatting and presentation. I think we could really get in the weeds there. Lots of potential ahead, but that brings a close to our junior heavyweight special. We hope you've all enjoyed this. I certainly enjoyed it. It was a blast for me, easiest show I've done all year. I just had to pass occasionally, and the lads did their thing. So much knowledge alongside me here. It was an absolute blast. Charles, please tell the people about Wrestling Playlist, which is just an immense asset for any wrestling fan. Go for it.
Well, thank you for having me on, as always. Wrestling Playlist is a daily newsletter you can get in your inbox. You can subscribe at wrestlingplaylist.com. And it's basically an attempt to capture the footage history of pro wrestling in order from the beginning. So a little over 4 years ago, we did the first issue, which started at the turn of the 20th century. And since then, we've made it to fall of 1988. So right now we're in September. So a little over 1,000 issues later, just doing, a 4-hour block at a time and just trying to make sense of it. And, there's so much stuff that's never been watched really, or has been forgotten, or that some people don't even know exist. And I love it. I'm so glad that, people have been interested in following along and joining and everything. But yeah, you can subscribe at wrestlingplaylist.com if you want to see more. We have bonus features sometimes to try to contextualize the footage we're seeing, a wrestling timeline, some music videos created by Rob Naylor that kind of show the highlights of each month as we complete it in the newsletter. So yeah, I'm excited. We're about to start 1989, which is kind of a golden year in terms of how it's perceived in the fandom. So we'll be starting that next month. And then I have some ideas to kind of do a retrospective on the 80s before we move on from it for good, and then go into the 90s. So some big things ahead.
Talk about a decade of change, right? The 80s, I mean,
Yes.
The amount of evolution that goes back to that word is unfathomable, really. Everyone check that out. I must say, if we ever get our beloved Rob Naylor on one of these shows, it may explode the StreamYard, just the quartet. I'll just sit back, I think, and let you guys do your thing on that one. We'll have to figure that out one day. But yeah, love Wrestling Playlist. Everyone go and support Charles and friends. Ibou, I'm sure you have metrics tonight, right? Or a Paragon or something of that effect.
Yeah, tonight I'm going to be watching some pro wrestling, and I'm excited for it. I do not have the lineup in front of me, so that's unprofessional of me. But we are going to watch some pro wrestling tonight. I'd expect that somewhere on 9 o'clock, 9:30. And I'll be with AO and Chris and Rob, and we'll be reacting and laughing and popping for pro wrestling and the like. So that's exciting. Can get into that. Tomorrow, we'll be doing self-made sessions. We'll be doing that probably a little bit earlier than normal because I have to watch the Knicks play in the NBA Finals. So... and I might be in the city for that too. Wish me good luck. Hopefully the Secret Service doesn't snatch me and do whatever. But yeah, so I'll be here doing content tonight in the Discord, in the Selfmade Discord. At Selfmade PW is the Twitter handle, and in the description or bio, whatever the hell it's called, is a link to our Patreon and Discord. And then on YouTube, Selfmade Pro, I'll be live tomorrow. So if you enjoy listening to me yap about professional wrestling, those are my usual haunts that you can find me in. And I appreciate Joe having me, and I appreciate Charles for being a part of this conversation that I had a good time taking a part in. In a weird way, it almost like jogged my memory, because a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about tonight, I haven't watched back in some time, and this kind of put me in the mood to kind of go through some of that stuff again.
Yeah, I told you you'd enjoy this. It's good. It's fun to talk about wrestling occasionally, you know what I mean? Big Fat Rich Cats in a super chat and said, shows like these are the reason I fell in love with the Late Night Grin to begin with. Thank you all so much for sharing your knowledge. This was a very easy situation for me where I was able to put together two friends that have talked a little bit but not much, and it's cool to kind of be able to bring different audiences together too, because I'm sure there's a difference in... the wrestling players audience may not necessarily be the self-made pro audience, but there's a lot more overlap there in what we like than people would realize, because we all like pro wrestling ultimately, right? And so, yeah, this was a blast. The flagship is back on Friday next week, or now this week, I suppose, for One Night Stand 2006. Last year we watched One Night Stand 05. This year, 20 years removed. We're headed back to Hammerstone for that. Contrarian Alex will be with us. Holber House show tomorrow. Retro pay-per-view Tuesday. WCW Lives and Dynamite on Wednesday. And then Friday, as I said, one night stand. Folks, if you haven't already, please do like the stream. Leave a comment, all that good stuff if you're feeling so generous. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, and a big fat orange cap for that super chat. Keep grinning. All hail. Enjoy this outro. Goodbye.